Welcome today, Max Oliviero from Umanest. Welcome, Max.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, great to have you on. This is a special edition where we talk to people in the industry, including people like yourselves who are involved with the same group of people that we are, who in this case are people that are actually investors in residential property that have property managers who are your customers needing tools to make sure that they do a good job of managing those things. But first of all, we're going to start with a little bit about you and your home loan experience, your house buying experience as an individual. So Max, how old were you when you bought your first home?
Right, so I think I was 25 at the time, 25 or 26. So yeah, maybe a little bit of background. Actually, I came from France about 10 years ago, and it's a very, very different way to approach property finance over there.
Yeah.
And I was involved in property development, so I had to deal with finance a bit. It's all fixed, for 30 years over there, so it's very, very different. Right. But anyways, that was the first experience. Was actually for myself was in New Zealand. I was about 25.
And was it hard? Like, what was the challenge? Getting the deposit together, finding the right properties?
Well, I was working as a property manager at the time, so I moved from property development to property management somehow by moving country. And so as a property manager, actually, it's a really, really good place to be if you want to be aware of the market and the kind of tenants and the kind, the value of the properties. And so it was a really good place, and it became obvious to me that I had to make a move. And I've always wanted to, but that gave me that confidence. So I think what worked for me is the confidence that I sort of knew what I was doing, because I was already managing, hundreds of risks for others. So it felt pretty natural, to be honest. The finance side of things was not that tricky, but I was maybe overconfident to some extent. But yeah.
What do you? I'd love to touch on the French dynamic. So, what do you see as the differences when it comes to, say, France versus New Zealand around home ownership, or even we'll touch a little bit on investment into residential property?
Yeah, it's quite different. I think people that have ties with the UK or Europe in general will probably have the same experience, and it's a very old market. It's not moving very fast. Whereas here, it's a smaller market for a start. It's kind of the national sport as well. So yeah, there's a lot more coverage. There's a lot more interest. And, although it's been changing over the past few years, it's actually less risky in my view here, because it's more liquid. Like you can sell buy more easily. So you're not over in Europe. It feels like you really commit for life pretty much, and you can always sell. But the transactions are not quite that easy to make. Here it's just that's a cycle. It's a lot shorter cycle.
I don't know what it is these days, but I remember in the past there was kind of an average 3-year cycle for home ownership, just for your primary residence in New Zealand, whereas I'm guessing in France or the UK that's more like a lifetime investment.
And so that's one aspect of it. I think the other big difference is rental laws are very, very protective of the tenant. And I've got countless like horror stories. My family members, and it's just there's one thing actually. When I started, I would never have worked as a property manager over there, to be honest. And one thing that still strikes me is in France you're not allowed to have a key to your own rental property
Right.
because it means you could access the property and it's just
It's quite
there's
prohibitive. Yeah.
it's gone too far really in my view, and then it makes the whole residential property investment a lot less attractive as a result. So yeah.
And how did you get into property management in the first place?
That's an interesting one. I was actually looking to at least I used to be so property development like program manager. But I came here to, one of the things was to learn English. So I actually made a phone call to a company saying, oh, maybe I could, be an assistant or something just to learn the ropes. But I couldn't understand a word of what he said on the phone. So I was like, right, maybe I'll have to give it some time, learn the language first. And actually, I came across an ad. They were looking for a French-speaking property manager.
Right.
This is pretty odd. Then turns out it's a company in downtown called One Place that is helping property owners from the French speaking countries in the Pacific, New Caledonia and Tahiti. So they needed someone that could talk to the landlords. So that's how I got into property management.
Yep. And do you see, I mean, before we get onto your current business and what you're doing there, do you see a lot changing in that New Zealand residential investment space? I know in the past it's sort of been very much a mum and dad portfolio space, but it does feel like it's maturing and changing. Do you see it changing?
Yeah, I think there's a few factors at play here. One of them is it's maybe like we used to when about 10 years ago we always compared ourselves to Australia because they seem to be about 5 years ahead of us in a number of things, like taking on innovation, for example, and the split like DIY landlords versus professionally managed land, property managers hired for the job it used to be about 80-20 split in Australia, and the same split in New Zealand, but the other way around. So here would be 80% of people actually managing themselves. And over the last 10 years, I think it's been going, it's hard to give an estimate, but from a few different sources I've heard, we're getting closer to almost 50-50 now. So it's become a lot, like with a few regulations that's come up over the past few years, it's become a little bit too hard or too scary for someone to try and keep up with all the regulation. So that's one thing I've noticed, and also the other thing especially after COVID is we see property management companies growing, the larger ones, and the smaller ones sort of disappearing.
Right.
So yeah, there's
consolidation or
some consolidation in the market. It's happened before where it was regulated and then unregulated. I think from what I've heard, it's about mid-2000s, and then there's been a whole lot of very small operators. And then now there's a consolidation phase again, and I feel all of that is actually affecting how like professionally managed how seriously people are taking the investment, especially residential.
There are more liabilities for the landlords than there used to be.
And that's a trend we've seen in Australia as well, especially typically Victoria,
right?
States where they're more they've come up with new laws, more protecting tenants, and there's a number of things that are great, and it's just something that comes to mind. But I was pretty shocked when I first realized that some houses had no insulation whatsoever. So yeah, it's for a climate that is, not that warm.
Yeah.
It was pretty shocking. So things
Yeah.
like obviously having a minimum standard for insulation
Mm.
is something that is, I have a bit of a technical background. To me, it seems pretty simple, but I
Yeah.
realized that plus the other things make it a little bit scary for some landlords. So
Yeah. Yeah.
they
So
just
that
better
probably,
hire someone.
yeah, and that probably leads nicely into talking about what you're doing now with Umanest. So tell us a little bit about Umanest and how that started.
Yes, I was actually reflecting on it, just talking about the fact that I had to learn a new language when I got here, and
Mm.
somehow I built a business to make communication easier
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
tenants and
True.
landlords, and regard like real estate. If you look at size management, like all of it is just down to personal relationships you have. Right. And so the idea was to really nurture that and make sure that you don't just rely on goodwill and property managers are extremely busy people that just bring out fires all the time. Yeah, they do a great job, but it's hard to actually keep up and make sure you get into you touch base with your customer base on a regular basis. So what we do here is we have a software system that connects to their trust accounting system where all the information is, and we send out satisfaction surveys triggered by specific events of the customer journey for both the tenants and landlords, and make sure they keep finger on the pulse. So that's the starting point, but the outcome is really how do you retain your clients, first of all, because there's no growth without retention. So making sure you retain your clients. And then once you know who's actually impressed with your service, make sure you use them to strengthen your brand, and grow by referral as well. So it's generating referral for people. So we got started with property management because that's sort of my experience in the last few years. And then that's probably the most complex one as well, because you essentially the ham in the sandwich here between the tenants and the landlords. So it's an interesting place to be. Try and please everyone. But we also help with like building managers and size as well. Really building their client base and their following.
Yeah. Yeah. The way I think about it in my head is I used to play SimCity. Do you remember? I don't know if you know
Right.
SimCity, but it's a computer
Not,
game
not
where
quite as nerdy, but yeah, I know what it is.
you build cities and you put people into their apartments and bits and pieces, and they'd go read if they got angry. An idea that there was something not right in terms of conditions or
Yeah. Now there's lots of risk management. That's the way it's typically felt actually, especially with tenants that when we started a few years ago, I think we're a little bit too early, to be honest. When people were like, asking how people feel about us, it's like nothing's good's going to happen. I'm not talking about the good operators here, just a couple. But then they realize actually, if you've got a property for 5 years, say, from an investor, and every year and a half, 2 years, you've got a new lot of tenant, and there's three tenants in there. You're talking like, 3 times, say, 5 or 4, so that's 12 tenants versus 1. So in terms of who's going to impact your brand, it's like a tenfold difference between opportunities between landlords and tenants, and then people realize, okay, there's a bit of risk management here because we don't want the 1-star reviews and so on. There's also an opportunity here because they build your brand, like the tenants and the landlords look at your brand and how if you've got good reviews coming from tenants, it's definitely serving you as well.
And I guess the cost to serve lowers in itself if you're not flipping tenants and doing all those bits and pieces that you'd have from having universities within a property or whatever. So you're making life easier for them in terms of that management piece. If you have nice consistent tenants over 5 years versus tenants swapping out because things aren't well looked after, there's a cost to that, right?
Yeah, and that's because actually back to my early days when I was studying, property of in France, we looked at property management and the overall value of the industry, and you realize, well, the investment is pretty much a one-off thing you do, but then you rely on a lifetime of return, and you rely on, and the cost of management is so much higher, like having good management of your property is far more impactful than having a good rate on your loan, year one.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got to look at all the aspects of your investment, but definitely property, the management and the kind of people you attract and you retain in your properties is really, really impactful. And I think that's also the good thing about moving away from DIY sort of approach to more professional is that's why you got into property, really, is so you can grow, like maintain an asset and create value out of it, and that's your tenants doing that.
That's right. So what markets are you in? You just New Zealand or?
Yeah. So stay local for now, So I'm based in Auckland. So we actually when I first landed, I moved to West Auckland. I sort of understand the place, and so it's been going through a bit of a growing phase at some point a few years back. So we got involved there with residential. Yeah.
And what do you think are the big opportunities in this industry for you? Like, what do you see coming that really excites you?
Well, it's an interesting time, isn't it? I think I'm trying to get myself a little bit less busy to give it more time and really do the work, searching for opportunities. But definitely as a whole, I think we are in an interesting phase of market, and I don't know, I feel like it was like that about 6-7 years ago. And then it became a little bit like the decision making from investors sort of got slightly disconnected from the reality. That's a personal sort of feeling. Just seeing what's happened around me, and I feel like this is like setting a better base for decisions made now. So I'm pretty excited. I think as a country, with what we don't realize is maybe people in the property don't realize from like immigration and people come, like the attractivity of New Zealand is as high as it's ever been. So I was reading something from the tourism holdings, and they measure how attractive a destination in New Zealand is. It's great for tourism, obviously, but it's also affecting immigration. It's affecting how, especially now that you can work from anywhere. Not everyone, but some people can. Then they will decide to actually, rather than being in Singapore or somewhere in Europe or something, they will decide to move here, and that's going to actually help with the demand. I think that there's a flow-on effect, and I would not be surprised if in the next couple of years we definitely see a massive spike in interest in people trying to settle here.
I guess the other thing we've seen over the last 6 years or so is a record amount of consents with new builds happening, and that stock's sort of coming to the market now. And a lot of it will be investment property. So it must be quite exciting for your industry to sort of see that opportunity sort of growing, or the housing stock growing in front of it. And I'm guessing also that those portfolio holders are getting bigger. Some of them, becoming more industrial in nature.
Yeah, I think there's the consolidation, with the industry you talked about earlier, but also with landlords. Some people that like that you've got a bit of a wave to ride at the moment for a lot of people with interest rates going up and yeah, lots of people seem to get scared a little bit, and the people that can afford to ride that wave are actually grabbing opportunities right, left, and center. So it's yeah, I think it's quite interesting. You probably have a lot more sort of insights in terms of the loan market, but what do you actually see here with?
Well, it's been a really different market. We've had a record year in terms of first home ownership, and so that's probably taken a group of people out of the rental pool who have been there for a while. They just couldn't get in, couldn't afford to buy until they'd built up deposit. They've had an opportunity with the market in the last 6 months where investors were out. Migrants were kind of out too because of COVID and other things, leading up to this period. And valuations came back. But at the same time, we had a really tight labour market. So their incomes have gone up a little bit. And, I think the average income increase for the last 12 months might have been to 31st of March was around 6%, which is really quite a substantial increase. And it really gave people some borrowing power that they didn't have. So I think we've moved a bunch of renters into homes. But what I also see is the migrant flows that you talked about. And you can't go straight into your home ownership when you arrive in a country. You've got to assimilate, get to understand it, figure out where you want to be, where the jobs are.
Yeah.
And so there's this huge opportunity there, I think, at the moment, in terms of good tenants coming into the country and looking for places to live. Yeah, that's my view.
Well, yeah, that's interesting. Also, there's probably in terms of the migration from tenants to owners, and maybe biased with my own sort of experience and cycle around me, but I feel like maybe people that come from overseas, first of all, they're not going to buy a house straight away, although it can happen, but I've rarely seen people do that.
Yeah.
But it's also by choice for the most part.
Yeah.
I certainly know a lot of people that could actually buy, but they decide to rent. And if I take my own situation, actually I rent where I live because I like the flexibility of that. And people that come from overseas probably are more comfortable with that sort of flexibility, being able to move around. And so, yeah, I have, there's definitely, and that's why the rental market is also this, like, we can have properties that are more attractive as rentals. I think there's the old sort of way of looking at it, which is slightly substandard kind of builds for rental, and then you build homeowners have nicer stock. It certainly is quite different over in Europe, for example, where rental stock and homeowners stock are actually quite similar.
Yeah.
In terms of the quality, the build quality, and so on. So I think I can sort of sense a market for higher quality rental properties.
Yeah.
People are willing to rent by choice.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. It's a bit of a generational shift, I think.
Yeah.
And there's a standards sort of set now, I think, for a younger generation that they're going to want to have a nicer experience with where they're living. I think back to when I was young, you had these sort of student flats, and that was your sort of starting point, and no one cared about the quality of those because the
Inflation
students,
was how many,
yeah,
layers you have to put to get to sleep
yeah,
without freezing.
yeah, you
Yeah.
had to go to sleep in your sleeping bag within your bed sheets to keep warm, sort of thing. But yeah, so I mean, it's changed a lot, but no one queried those sorts of things back then. But now there is a higher expectation around the quality of a property. So I think it has changed. And so last couple of questions for you. This one is I usually ask the question, what advice have you got for first home buyers? And we can talk about that, but I want to ask you this question first. What's your advice for first time renters in New Zealand? What should they consider?
All right. Well, that's actually an interesting one because it's scary. It's if you go back to when you're in your early 20s, it's actually quite scary to try and apply for a property.
Mm.
So and it's quite competitive. Like I've definitely seen a lot of people trying to apply for the same property, and trying to stand out is difficult.
Mm.
So definitely as a former property manager as well, it's all about, again, relationships. So can we have you got some references, and obviously being able to show for income levels and everything is important, but it's all down to how likely you are to communicate well. So communication is extremely important. Just being just keeping in touch, and having following up, and just acting like someone really interested and picking up the phone. Then the rest is so being able to pay on time. It's not so much about the income level, but it's about a former reference being able to vouch for that, and then being able to keep a property in order. But I think it's really down to how serious you are about putting together an application. And I've definitely seen a lot of people still don't take it very seriously at all. So if you do, and you do a good job at putting a good application together, a good submission, then there's you're ahead of the pack already. So references are very important.
And hopefully the property managers are using Umanest so that they can communicate even better.
Well, that's actually a thing we try and really help the market with the tenants as well, where we can provide them with a reference. So we actually help with that part, where we ask the agent, the property manager, when the tenant moves on, is there something you can say about this tenant? Can you rate him or her? And then we share that with the tenant, and then they've got a bit of a CV, really, showing how strong of a contender they are for the next property.
Yeah.
But that's all about trust.
That's right. Yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's about building trust. Yeah. Last question. What's the tip of the week from you in terms of property investment in New Zealand? What's the one thing you'd throw on the table?
Tip of the week. Actually, a bit of a story. I think you should not bid if you don't have approved finance, which I've done in the past.
It's a very good one. Relates to what I do. Yeah, I totally agree.
It makes for a very interesting chat with the banks afterwards, but probably best not to do it.
Yeah,
I had it was funny, but it was not.
Yeah. Well, and part of what subject to finance is about is making sure that people get set for the property hunt in terms of the finance piece before they go and start looking at properties, because we all know that people fall in love with properties. It's a very emotional buy often, and the worst thing is when it turns around and they can't buy that property that they've just fallen in love with. So we always sort of say, get your finances in order first, get pre-approved so you know what your borrowing power is, and then start looking at the market and what you can buy.
Yep,
Yeah.
we should have had that chat earlier. But
Well, that's
absolutely,
been
just being
yeah,
confident.
that's been great, Max. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I'll put a link to Umanest in the video itself at the bottom so that people can see it. Go and check out your website. But yeah, I wish you all the best in terms of the growth of it over the next few years. Yeah.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Max.